April showers have given way to May flowers, which I promptly had to pull up because some of them were invasive species. Little gardening humour for you there. Here's a selection of what I've been playing this month. Caught off guard by the sudden announcement of a sequel no one expected, I finally found the time to check out the first entry in this unusual supernatural visual novel series. A cult favourite capturing the imagination of murder mystery fans across the spectrum, Paranormasight, the Seven Mysteries of Honjo, is a fascinating fable, told through a beautifully bite-sized structure that has allowed me to chip away at the layers of its mysteries periodically throughout this month. Capturing an imaginative mix of conspiracy, ghostly apparitions, and what I can only describe as what if Diamond is unbreakable was slightly less silly but no less grim. There's a brilliant smorgasbord of narrative hooks to be found here, pulled together by a compelling, well-written cast and a really lovely comic book-esque visual presentation. You're investigating the spooky goings-on of a group of seemingly unrelated people within the district of Honjo as an event known as the Feast of Shadows suddenly grants folk otherworldly powers based on local mythology. Each curse-bearer is given the knowledge that with the right number of soul dregs claimed from unwilling victims, they can invoke the rite of resurrection and bring back to life someone once lost. Each power has trigger conditions that need to be met, creating these unique cat and mouse pairings throughout the story that give it a sort of serialized pace, hence the comparisons to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Curse bearers are basically stand users, utilizing mind games as much as supernatural prowess to get the upper hand on their foes, and frankly this is exactly the sort of genre that Araki's manga series should be getting adapted into, rather than a series of dull brawlers. But that's neither here nor there, and also not the point of this video. Paranormasight also recognises and utilises its identity within the medium to pull off some really clever fourth wall stunts along the way, but sparingly and quite smartly it doesn't inundate the player with repetitions of those same ideas. A nice touch of 3DS era magic in the modern age, and although parts of the late game, ones that require crossing between narrative timelines, get a little choppy and hard to understand what is needed to progress, by its conclusion it rather miraculously wraps everything up neatly, and I was left quite satisfied with the sum total of what I had experienced. I think this would be a great starting point for any budding visual novel curio to sink their teeth into, and although I haven't yet played The Mermaid's Curse, I'd be more than happy if they released a new one of these every couple of years. Cosmo D is one of those creators that I will always go to bat for. His body of work is eminently compelling, this weird mix of absurdist humour and biting social commentary, coupled with funky soundtracks that draw on his background as the cellist for the classical jazz fusion group Archipelago. I've played through Off-Peak, the Norwood Suite, and Tales from Off-Peak City Volume 1 countless times for this very reason, but rather strangely, my relationship with the latter half of his body of work is somewhat different. I haven't gone back to Betrayal at Club Low as much as the others, and with his latest release, Moves of the Diamond Hand, I find myself wondering, as the series evolves and gets increasingly complex, are the vibes alone enough to keep me engaged? This game launched into early access, I should mention, which means what is there now might not be what the game becomes once it reaches 1.0, but what is there already is an undeniably brilliant setup. Cosmo D's artistic insights and political lens are shining through with full force, presenting us with a tale of socio-economic strife and underhanded electoral upheaval. You're caught at the apex of an era-defining moment for Off-Peak City as three mayoral candidates fight for supremacy while corporate interests pull the strings from the shadows. All the while, your goal is, rather humbly, to join the circus. It's a compelling premise off the bat, and the RPG mechanics are layered with these brilliantly fun bits of flavor text that really make use of the weirdness of that world. The ambition of the game also shines through wonderfully, as this is a much bigger and more complicated version of what we saw in Betrayal at Club Low. Although you start off in a more contained region, the threads of bigger ideas are more than enough to whet your appetite for the world's true scope, and that world is no less exciting to dig into. Even in a scant few hours, I've seen so many examples of Off-Peak City at its peak, I guess. The unusual coupled handsomely with the mundane. Bird-headed goons and cyclopean lions stalk the streets, meanwhile clones down energy drinks and lament the sandwich prices at the local deli. It's a hell of a vibe. But there are issues, and these started to seep in fairly quickly for me once I started to engage with its systems, where the design quirks that I found in Betrayal at Club Low could be found in full force here also. The way in which this game handles challenges, and more importantly how generous it is in its upgrade system, means that you are encouraged quite early on to become a jack of all trades. Dice start meek, with your choices informing which of the spread of skills you focus on, and you have to spend points earned throughout encounters to increase the numbers side by side. I'm very much a non-confrontational RPG player. I opted for the social skills, wit, observation, music, but I found quickly that this more defined approach to character creation locked me out of a lot of challenges for which there didn't seem like any reasonable alternative. I felt like the game wasn't funneling me down a specific path with my choices, but rather holding me to ransom until I lucked into a less creative workaround. It's not to say that this is a sloppy system, certainly it has its boons. The buff and debuff mechanics are a really smart way of contextualizing your advantages and disadvantages in certain encounters throughout the narrative, and a lot of the time you can get through particularly hairy encounters with a few pick-me-ups, a tactical outfit change, and the knowledge that a tie almost always works in your favor, but it still feels quite chaotic in not a particularly satisfying way. Cosmo D's work was sold on the principles of atmosphere and artistic merit. In fact, his first ever venture into digital realms, Saturn V, was a museum tour with no objectives. The vibes still remain here, but I do feel somewhat bogged down by the fiddliness of those mechanics in a way that makes me wish that this was a more simple game, akin to the point-and-click stylings of the Norwood suite. Time will tell what Moves of the Diamond Hand will evolve into, but I have faith in Cosmo D's ability to show me something no other artist can. I'm certainly here for the long haul. Expect a more in-depth video about this game down the line. Fez is a game that has been rather tragically painted by the drama surrounding its creative lead, but in itself it is one of my favourite platformers, a game I return to every couple of years and always leave satisfied. And of course this hasn't changed this time around. I had a great time digging back into this weird and wonderful world, the 2D into 3D perspective shenanigans consistently impressive even 13 years later. The player character Gomez has a brilliantly purposeful weight to his movement that I feel like I'm appreciating even more now that I've engaged with a lot of games since, ones that understand how important that can be to the way you play. I made a video about this game yonks ago in which I decried the more cerebral elements of its meta puzzles as being a bit too clever for its own good, and I do still stand by that assessment. I also can't talk about Fez without continuing to be mouth agape at just how bad its map is. I do get what they were thinking with its design, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't work all that well. But having said all that, the meat of the experience, your navigation of these strange lands, remains a joy to interact with. With all the obfuscated accoutrement being front and centre of the conversation about this game, not to mention Phil Fish's explosive retreat from public and the cancellation of its sequel, we would do well to remember to celebrate what Fez is at its core. A nice, gentle platformer that is a lot of fun to engage with, even if you don't quite get on with that spicier second half. I'll see you again in another few years, Gomez. Stay hopeful, buddy. The Red Pearls of Borneo is a deductive mystery built around this really interesting semi-historical setting. Taking place over the course of a night on a tobacco plantation at the tail end of the Second World War, you are tasked with finding out what happened to the plantation's owner and his daughter. This is done through a faintly nonsensical supernatural deus ex machina, but how it manifests in gameplay terms is that you're selecting locations within the plantation and coming up with a timeline of events, figuring out who was where and when, imagine what happened to everyone present during that fateful night and where they ended up. It's quite a satisfying sequence to chew your way through, going up and down the timeline, reading through dialogue transcripts, and piecing together an hour-by-hour snapshot of the multitude of comings and goings of over a half a dozen characters throughout. The story underpinning the mystery is engaging, although the writing is good but nothing special. A lot of the tension has gone into ensuring the setting feels authentic, with the use of regional colloquialisms, era-appropriate terms, and also a fair amount of racial slurs in the mix too, although you are given the option to censor these at the start should you wish. Overall, I think the game did a really good job of highlighting a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of attention from media projects, and a nice, unobtrusive history lesson was provided throughout. This can be finished in an evening, and outside of some minor screen formatting issues I couldn't quite figure out how to fix, I had a really nice time picking away at the layers of mystery found within. It's got great Sunday afternoon radio drama energy. I feel like this would really benefit from a premium revision that included vocal performances, but for a free-to-play offering, I really think this is a great debut, and they probably could have charged for this. This only came out about a month ago, but the team behind it have already announced a follow-up that I will definitely be interested in playing when it releases later in the year. Particulitix is a game that, like Panthalassa, which I recently released a video about, was only brought to my attention because the developer emailed me directly, and very kindly offered me the chance to try out their game before its launch on the 6th of June. Given that I'm not normally interested in this style of game, I was surprised at how much I've ended up digging this. What's found within is a reconciliation of that recent trend of bullet heaven game design into the much more established twin-stick shooter genre, which, if we're being honest, is where all of that came from in the first place. It's a bit of an Ouroboros, really. But rather than being a staunch genre staple, this feels like a more methodical, less reactive interpretation of that familiar gameplay loop. There's a greater need for damage management and crowd control, and something I really respect is that the passive pattern recognition of most bullet heaven games I've played is simply not viable here. This isn't a spray and pray kind of shooter. You have to be careful with your movement and your actions. Your clip is limited, reloading takes time, and prioritizing threats in the wrong order can cost you dearly. The space you occupy presents you opportunities throughout to bolster your chances of survival with these designated transient zones that offer up boons such as triple damage or faster reload times, themselves zipping across the battlefield after a defined period, and the mix of this with the strategic spawning of enemies throughout means that you end up in this quite dreamlike ballet of bullets, with a great mix of aversion and desire motivating the way you move around and what you're willing to risk. The 4 archetypes you can play as have a surprisingly varied impact on the way you play, with some weapons being fairly standard point and shoot, while others work in slightly less controllable ways, requiring you to figure out on the fly how best to utilize their quirks to survive. Upgrades add extra features into the mix, an offering of mini skill trees that you can be quite tactical about with enough time with the game. That's the bit that feels the most like Vampire Survivors to me. But again, look at the chain of inspiration. You'll see decades of game design tropes that this all draws from. But what matters more is how well it fits within the intended experience of this particular game. And the result is occasionally messy, especially in terms of the readability of the screen once things start to get a bit hectic, and I feel like the user interface could do with a little bit of work. The text boxes don't quite pop out as well as I would like. It also took me a while to get used to how underpowered you feel at times, that being a consequence of intended design, not an error, but still something that led to a fair few game overs before I finally made peace with how different Particulitix strays from the mold. It is undeniably compelling, and although I wouldn't say there is much here that I haven't seen before, I have been playing this a lot more than I anticipated. The total package is a decent little challenge and one for your radar. And that's it for May. As always, a massive thank you to my Patreon supporters, the Rasta Rascals, and don't forget, if you aren't able to financially support the channel, you can still sign up for free to get access to additional posts and behind-the-scenes musings about my creative process, who inspires me, and my thoughts on any given discourse doing the rounds. Ciao for now, and I will see you in June.